Could Ukraine become a hub for international startups? Certainly with the talent, funding and access to new markets, analysts think it can. But what are the main challenges for entrepreneurs and what sort of external help is there? Well, joining us here on Ukraine Today at the conference, Ukraine is looking for startups, co-organised by KPMG, is John Van Aken. He's a US venture capitalist, author and speaker. Thank you very much for joining us on Ukraine Today.
My pleasure.
So Ukraine has definitely a lot of potential. So can you briefly tell us about the project that you've started here in Ukraine?
Yeah, sure. Backstory is really simple. I was here in, I guess it was the end of April with Richard Branson at the Forum 1 event. And I stayed here for a couple of weeks and ended up kind of by accident talking to 28 different startups. They had all reached out to me on Facebook and LinkedIn. And I realized there was a lot of ideas, a lot of talent, a lot of possibilities. But the problem was people really didn't fundamentally understand how to set up a startup, and not just from a Western standpoint, but just from a logical standpoint. So fast forward to today, I got together with one of the partners at KPMG here in Ukraine, and we thought, well, what if we had a startup competition? I've got rich friends, I've got investor friends, and so we decided to create Ukraine's Looking for Startups. And we thought we'd have some interest, but it's been overwhelming. In 2 weeks, we had over 4,000 different startups register. And
what sort of startups? Are they tech startups or across the range?
Oh, God. In the beginning, we were thinking about, we wanted to try to focus, what did we want to focus on? But then we thought, okay, 30 years ago, nobody was paying $6 for a crazy coffee from Starbucks, so we let it be wide open. And we've got tech startups, we've got agricultural startups, we have small businesses like cafes or people that are making clothing. A guy gave me my own original perfume. And I mean, it's everything. And some of the ideas are wild and crazy. Some of them, I mean, I would invest in myself. So it's everything, really.
Yeah. And what are the main challenges for Ukrainian startups from what you've seen and the people that you've spoken to?
It's not money.
No?
No, it's understanding how to set up a business model that will work. I mean, if I really believe if you've got a great idea that makes sense, that's really monetizable, you're going to have people chasing you. The problem is understanding how to sit down and fundamentally put together a business plan and validate all your assumptions. I mean, I've got people that will tell me, well, I've got this great idea, and I'll type in, do a Google search, and in 2 minutes I find 50 competitors that they didn't think about because they're only thinking about their city. But then they don't realize that those competitors could actually compete with them globally.
Yeah, so what are the main things that you're telling these guys at the conference then? What are, let's say, for example, the top 3 things that they should be looking at to focus their business plan and expand the markets?
The first one is to validate their assumptions, to really become good friends with Google and Google everything, and really dig into, and not just from the Ukraine, but from a regional and a global perspective. You got to speak English, of course, to be able to do that, so they can see really who they're up against. That's the first big thing. Second big thing is for them to focus on really working their butt off. Because if you're a startup, you do everything if it's a CEO. And I guess the third thing is to be able to look at ways that you can create a movement. Not just spend money on advertising, but really get things going viral. That's what we did with...
Using social media, this is one of the tools.
Oh, well, for sure. And not just using social media, but doing things that are going to be carried virally on social media. Not just putting up posts of your product. That's not going to go viral. But if you look at Richard Branson, what a great marketer. He decides to launch something and I'm going to jump out of a building and, he launches a company. That's great PR. And if you start thinking out of the box, anything's possible.
I see. And looking at the other perspective as well, you have the investors that you're trying to attract to Ukraine. And I know you're visiting here, but often Ukraine is in a lot of the bad press. There's fights in parliament, there's the war in the east, and there's like politicians throwing bottles of water at each other. So how exactly do you create a positive image of Ukraine? Because this is what people look at on the internet.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I'm not visiting. I mean, I'm going to be doing some investing in startups myself.
Oh, you're doing some more work here.
Yeah, and I've been in the region for over 20 years, most of the time. But to me, I'm looking for specific investors that are willing to make 200,000 to 2 million hryvnia investments, which is, you know, $10 to $100,000. So for an angel, that's not big money, and there could be the next Uber, the next Facebook, the next iPhone here. I think that venture capitalists, by definition, are risk takers, right? So I don't think that bothers them so much. I will say this, what's interesting is when we started this, we were thinking about only having Western investors, but we are getting calls almost every day from local investors that are interested in being part of the investment team. Yeah. So what's really cool is that not only are we, you know, attracting people from the West, but locally, people are stepping up and saying, you know, I want to be involved in this.
But why would these venture capitalists come to Ukraine when you have world markets? Well, what is it about Ukraine, in your point of view, that is so good for these guys?
I think there's a couple of things. First of all, I think there's a 2-year window of opportunity. Things will not remain the same as they are with the war situation forever, okay? So if you're going to invest in Ukraine, I mean, there's a huge opportunity if it relates to something technological or something talent-based. That's the first thing. I think also that if you're presented as a VC or an angel with some crazy ideas, you really don't care where the ideas come from as long as somebody can, you know, do the math and connect the dots. Today you can crowdfund. Today you can operate globally from Ukraine. So it's not so much I'm investing in Ukraine and there's a war going on. It's I'm making an investment in a startup that I think is possible. Yeah. And I would say this, what's so great about Europe or the United States, or, I mean, I can pick apart any part of the world as saying, okay, well, there's problems. Maybe not wars, but definitely economic issues. I mean, look at Europe this summer, you know, Greece is rising up. And so I think for the right VCs and the right investors, it's a totally different mindset.
Yeah. And what about the rights of shareholders? I was speaking to one of my friends before the interview, and they have a tech startup, and they were saying that one of the main problems is trying to assure investors that their shareholders' rights are fulfilled, I guess, because in Ukraine there is this like whole loopholes and that sort of thing. So how do you assure these investors that they're actually going to get their money back anyway?
Well, aren't there loopholes in the United States? Aren't there loopholes in Europe? I mean, I could argue very much to the opposite side of that.
But it's very much a legal issue, though. It's with the government. So with projects like yours, do you try and lobby the government to create a better environment for these startups?
At this point, no. I'm not political. I'm more kind of in the middle. I'm not trying to play sides. I will say this, though. Part of what we're asking investors to do is, you know, make investments, but we're also going to the companies and saying, all right, look, for these guys to make investments, there's got to be some transparency with the company, and how the investor works with the startup. I mean, that ultimately ends up being their deal. I mean, I have no doubt that some of the startups will end up setting up more of an international type of ownership structure to be able to help protect the rights.
Well, this is what happens with a lot of tech startups, am I right? Now, they have a little base in Ukraine, but often they go to Silicon Valley or other locations as well, Sure. And so how many investors, how much do you think they're actually willing to put on the line for these Ukrainian startups? Well, is that a big risk?
Well, I guess it depends on the type of investor.
That's true,
you know, but not really. We set it up to where there'll be 7 investors on a panel, and there'll be over 20 online. So it will be quite the competition. Yeah. And the investors are signing off that they will be willing to make investments of between 200,000 and 2 million hryvnia per project. The investors that we're attracting, basically we're asking them, it's kind of like a poker game. You know, you have to be able to bring $300,000 to the table. That doesn't mean that you have to make any investment, but we have done some.
You have to put the money down.
Well, they're not giving us money, but you know, through reputation, we know that there are people that would be a bit willing to make those investments. Yeah. I really believe that what's going to ultimately happen is it'll be a few $1 million maybe in investments overall for all the projects, but it's a first start because I don't think this is going to be the last one.
I see. And I also want to ask you about other opportunities apart from investing.
Sure.
Have you seen a lot of programs in Ukraine for training and cross-border education, that sort of thing? Is it still developing that?
One of the reasons why I decided to do this is because, and I've told everybody this, I've been doing startups for 20 years, which means I'm an expert at making money and an expert at losing money. Okay, and
more the expert at making money, I hope.
Well, depending on the year, you know. And so what I'm doing here is I'm endeavoring not to give people recipes, because how do you tell somebody how to be successful 5 years from now? I don't know. You don't know. Things change.
Well, things change, right?
Exactly. So I'm teaching people to cook. Not trying to give them my recipes, but say, okay, if you do this and this, I guarantee you'll lose money. This and this are probably not good. This is definitely stupid. And my mistakes and what I've learned from other people making mistakes is more powerful than the success techniques. I meet a lot of people that are training startups. One of the problems is they just don't have the depth of knowledge. And one of the reasons why we decided to do this here is there's so many great people doing startup projects, and there's hubs and there's training.
Thousands of them.
Yeah, but they're doing small stuff. And what's exciting to me is they're hungry to know how to succeed.
And this is what you need to keep. Okay, excellent. John Von Aken, thank you very much for joining us on Ukraine Today.
My pleasure.
Back to the news.